Hey, it's Katie, and today I'm going to be doing a review and a little bit of a talk about The Devil and Miss Prym by Paulo Coehlo. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. This, believe it or not, is the third book in a series. I think the other two are By the River Pierda, I Sat and Wept or Cried or something like that, and Veronica Decides to Die. You do not need to read those two books in order to read this book. I have not read them myself, nor do I intend to, because they all, from what I understand, center around this common theme. Are humans inherently good or evil? In this book, a stranger comes to the tiny town of Viscose, Brazil, and presents the youngest inhabitant of the village, who is actually in her 20s, I'd estimate. He tells her that he has 11 gold bars that he will give to the village if someone is murdered in the village in the week that he will be staying there. And he wants the girl that he tells, whose name is Chantal Prym, to inform the rest of the village of this, and if she doesn't tell them, then he will tell them, which would in turn cause them to think that Chantal was trying to keep the money from them, and they might turn on her. So she gets stuck between a rock and a hard place, pretty much, between do I tell the village and possibly become an accessory to murder, or do I not tell them and become the victim myself? It is a pretty interesting take on human nature. I feel like human nature is a tough thing to write about because it is a very hard subject to find a definite answer on, and that is what the stranger in this book wanted, was a definite answer. Were humans all, under the right circumstances, willing and able to commit evil? And that is what he wanted. He wanted a black and white, clear as crystal answer, which you can't get when it comes to human nature, in my opinion. There are three characters that I really want to discuss, the first of which is the stranger. He is representative of evil in this story because he, first of all, does carry a devil within him. That is what is said kind of in the beginning, that he has a lot of inner demons, which I don't really want to touch on why so much. But he is also the source of temptation, which is the gold, and especially in religion, evil / the devil and temptation go hand in hand. Then we have the opposite end of the spectrum, Berta, who is the town's oldest resident. She is representative of good, and she's just this sweet little old lady, and she sits in her rocker and watches over the village to keep an eye out for evil entering the village, and she is the first to recognize that the stranger carries a devil within him. Then we have Chantal Prym, who is the town's youngest inhabitant, and she is representative of humans and human nature. She's very much caught up in this struggle between good and evil, and she has to decide what she believes about human nature, and also which side of the battle does she fall on. Chantal, just as a character in a non-symbolic sort of fashion, she is very unsettled with her life in Viscose. She has been raised to believe that it's an absolute paradise, and it's kind of turned into her own personal hell. She is kind of promiscuous in that any visitor that comes to town, she wants to fall in love with them, or to at least build enough of a relationship with them to get out of the town. And she kind of has a little bit of an off reputation because of that. Also, her reputation is further tarnished when she tells the town of the stranger's wager. They think that she is the source of the evil in the town, not the stranger. Let's talk about the town where this takes place, which is Viscose. It is very important to the plot because if this were to have occurred in, say, a big city or just a different small town, this would not have played out the same way because Viscose has a very interesting past. I'm going to talk a little bit about that past, so if you don't want to hear about that now, please mute it until the spoiler warning somewhere at the bottom or in the middle of the screen goes away. The backstory to this village is that it used to be a hotbed for the scum of the earth, basically. It was home to thieves and murderers and terrible people all around, pretty much. And the leader was the nastiest of all the nasties, Ahab. And one night, Ahab takes in a priest, and he is all prepared to kill the priest, but then in the morning he wakes up and cries by the priest's bed and says, something to the effect of, you believed that I was capable of behaving in a good manner, so I did. And he then converts to Christianity and transforms Viscose into a terrible place, to a town of good people. And he does this in a very interesting way. He builds a gallows in the center of the village, and then he just doesn't say anything about it. He does some other things to reform the village, which I can't really remember right now because I don't have my actual copy of the book with me. But he then, once the village is transformed, he turns that gallows into a cross. That part was very interesting to me because I think that it is symbolic of how evil can become good, and that just because you start out one way doesn't mean you have to end that way, if that makes sense, even though that does kind of conflict with what is said at the end, which I agree with even more. I actually kind of got pretty invested in the fate of Viscose, despite not liking the main characters very much, and not liking the writing, which, bear in mind, I did not read this in its original language of publication, so I'm sure a lot was lost in translation, because it's hailed as having beautiful writing, which I didn't quite see in my English version of it. So, for me to have been really, I won't say really, I was pretty invested in the future of this town and some of the people in this town. That's a pretty big deal, so props to you, Paulo Coehlo, for getting me to really care about this book when I didn't like most aspects of it. So that to me is kind of rare. There are two things that really stuck with me from this book, and this first one does contain quite a few spoilers, so please, if you don't want to hear about it, go ahead and mute it. So, when the town is getting ready to commit their murder of choice, which ends up being Berta, which broke my heart entirely, that whole end part with her being taken like a lamb to the slaughter, pretty much. That was really, really sad to me. But then, right before she's murdered by the entire village, and yes, I mean all 281 inhabitants of the village had their guns trained on her and were going to shoot her, Chantal steps in, and she talks about another part of the Ahab story. Ahab asked the priest all of these questions. I can't remember what they were, but like one of them I think was something about, if I brought you the most beautiful woman in the village, would you not feel attracted to her? And he said, yes, I would, but I would be able to control myself. And he asks him all these questions that relate back to how Ahab thinks and what he would think if he saw X thing. And the priest says, yes, I would think that, but I would control myself. And that played a huge part in Ahab's changeover to Christianity, is that he realized that the priest and him thought the same way, but what made them different was what side of the battle of good and evil they decided to act on. And I found that very interesting. And in the end, the village did leave and they decided not to kill Berta because they realized that evil actions do not produce good. The last thing that really, really stuck with me was a quote from towards the beginning that says something to the effect of, "The story of one man is the story of all humanity." I want to know what you think of this, because I really strongly disagree. One person's story is not the story of everyone else. It depends on how good and evil cross people's lives. Not everyone is going to have a stronger good side, and not everyone is going to have a stronger bad side. So you can't base the thinkings of all humanity based on one person or on one village. I'd love to hear what you think about that, if you think differently, or if you think the same and have different reasons for thinking so. Please, please tell me below, because I really do want to hear what you think about this. Overall, you're really not missing that much if you don't read this, to be completely honest. It's not my favorite book I've ever read. I don't agree with a lot of the things said in the middle of the book about human nature, although I do agree with the part in the end about human nature that it all depends on which side is stronger in you and which one you choose to act on. I do agree with that, but the rest of it I'm not so sure about. I gave it a 3 out of 5 on Goodreads, and I was wavering between that and a 2, but I feel really bad down scoring a book so much because I was pretty invested in the plot of it, even though I didn't like the characters or the writing that much. If you've read this book, I would love to hear what you thought of it, because I'm really curious as to what other people thought about this book, because I'm not sure if I'm in the majority or minority of thinking about this book. If you've read any other of Paulo Coelho's books, which I believe one of them, the most well-known, is The Alchemist, then I would also love to hear your thoughts about those and whether or not you thought the writing was very good or not. So please tell me your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you very much for watching. Bye!